The finding point was going through the airport in Denver at 7 o'clock at night, trying to read the stupid signs, being really tired, not having enough sleep. And thinking, you know what? Okay, fine. I'm just going to go get the darn thing.
We should be able to hear something.
Okay. No, my phone's in here. It doesn't ring very often. It listens 15 times.
I hit mute on both these things, so they shouldn't be able to, or no, not on mine.
The audio pin is 32, and then hit 42 pounds. 45. Sure, the whole thing. Where's the... No, you put it on hold. How do you take it off hold? Went on hold when it went into mute.
Michelle, are you with us? I'm showing all we're waiting for is Chuck Bonham and Gary Armstrong. So we'll give them 2 minutes or so and we'll get going here.
Well, I can tell you what the difference between a coyote is and a black-footed ferret is in Utah. $50 bounty.
Chuck is not on the call today, but we do have other Fish and Game California reps on the line.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sandy.
Welcome.
Yay.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started. As we get started, I just want to give a brief introduction to OWP. While I'm doing this, go ahead and flip your microphones on if you can. We're going to do a quick roll call just to see how many we have here. OWP is an affiliate of OWPW, and we've got Dave Chadwick, who is our president online. We have Ann Forston, who is our president-elect, myself, who's the treasurer, and Mary Lyon, who is our secretary. They are in and amongst yourselves, and also we have Michelle Bouclet, who is our past president. What this presentation is going to be is a continue of the joint annual meeting of directors and commissioners, and some of it will be a recap, but hopefully we can move through that fairly quickly and move on to bigger and better things. But just as a quick rundown, Alaska, Maria, are you there?
I am.
How many folks do you have with you?
Just me.
Okay. Stacy, do you have, how many people do you have with you there?
Just Dave and I.
Okay. Tara, do you have folks with you?
I don't. It's just me, Lauren.
All right. Ann was kind enough to call me and said that their people are having video issues and they might join us a little later. Peter, how many folks do you have with you?
3, myself, Jeff Kapaska, Fisheries Bionutrition, and Barb Geiger, Aquatic Education.
Excellent. Michelle?
I have 3 others with me.
All right. Gary Armstrong, did you make it?
Yep, I made it.
How many people do you have with you?
Just myself, thank you.
All right. Brian Clark?
Yes, I'm here, and regrettably couldn't have other folks with us. Our executive staff are out around in the state doing town hall meetings this week.
Okay. Amy?
Yes, we're here in Missouri. There's 3 others.
All right. Alicia?
Hi, Lauren. It's myself and 11 others for Nebraska Game and Parks.
All right. Nice showing. Amanda?
Hi, just myself on behalf of Responsive Management.
All right. Dana?
Right now, myself, but I've got at least 1, if not 2 others coming.
All right. Glenn?
Just me.
Okay. And Sandy, out in California. How many do you have with you there?
I have myself and Mr. John Donnelly of the Wildlife Conservation Board.
All right. Good to have you. Thank you for joining. We also might have a couple other people because I let them know that Florida was not available to come in. I started down the waiting list and they might join as we go. But to recap again, this is hopefully a continuation or a augmentation of the conversation we had at the WAFWA meeting. Just by way of introduction, for those of you that don't know me, I am a biologist by training in my undergrad. I was able to take a brief hiatus from those studies and go down to Bolivia and Peru and do some forage preference on the camelids down there. Then I started my master's degree originally in biology, but I figured with the skills that come natural to me and all factors at play, I decided, I could probably do more for wildlife by studying the people rather than the wildlife themselves. And so I trotted off to CSU to do a PhD with Dr. Tara Teal, who's on the line here. So, and then hopefully in October I'll be able to defend and graduate and be done with schooling for a little while. Just a quick recap, though. We are recording this, so anything you say is public record. Just a warning to Dave out there. Okay, so enough of my background. About our collective background. Our agency resiliency is really being tested right now. People are beginning to perceive wildlife very differently. Hunting and fishing is on the decline. And viewership, wildlife viewing is increasing quite significantly while hunting and fishing is declining. Now, this comes from a change that, even as few as 2 or 3 decades ago, people generally tended to view wildlife as a food source, whereas now they tend to view wildlife as a source of companionship, as illustrated by this gal taking a photo of that fox there. In a controlled setting, people are willing to sacrifice true nature setting for this artificial kind of setting. And to give you an illustration, this is my son on a beach doing your natural nature, but he's just as happy exploring nature in an artificial nature as well. Now, specifically to Arizona, we have illustrated these changes because we've asked the same question for the last 2 decades. We asked the question in the past 12 months, did you go hunting? And this is what we found. We found that 2 decades ago, about 15% of our population went hunting, whereas in more recent times we've seen that decline to about 6%. When we asked the same question about fishing, about 1 in 3 said that they went fishing 2 decades ago, and now about half of that are participating in that activity right now. When you compare that to viewing wildlife, we've seen a pretty significant increase there. Now, in Arizona, when you view those participants in a Venn diagram, you've got a pretty good overlap. This group right here are those who participate in all 3 of those activities. However, where they don't overlap, like out here and here, are those who just participate in one activity. And in Arizona, by far, the largest group that only participates in one activity is this wildlife viewing group. And I asked the question, how well does your state communicate with just this group, the group that is only represented out here? The reason why I asked that is Arizona's identified this as one of our weaknesses. We have seen that the hunting and angling communities have organized themselves such that communicating with them comes very easy to us. We've become experts over the last few decades of communicating with them. But Arizona acknowledges that we have some room for improvement in communicating with this group. Now, a quick side note is this group is not a monolithic group. There are different kinds of wildlife viewers, and getting them involved in and coming into our constituency is going to involve a multi-pronged approach, and that'll be the subject of next month's webinar. But that kind of gives you a brief rundown of what that might be. Now, when people see the declines of hunting and fishing, some people question, is the public passion for wildlife, is that fading? Is it going away? And we ask that question, how important is just knowing that wildlife is there? How important is that to you? And overwhelmingly, it was important to folks. The warmer colors are the agree categories. The green is the neutral, and then the cooler colors are those who disagree with that statement. 97% of Arizonans said that knowing that wildlife is there is important to them. Furthermore, actually seeing it, 98% recorded that. Then this one, having plenty of different species of wildlife around, is important to me. We're trying to get at species diversity there. And then finally, wildlife contributes to my quality of life. This one down here at the bottom. This is one that we trot out with our legislature quite a bit, where we can say 9 out of 10 Arizonans believe that wildlife contributes to the quality of their life. And that seems to resonate with those folks. So as kind of a conclusion to the first section of this presentation, we have some broad, irreversible societal trends that are really changing the way people interact with wildlife. The forces of modernization are going to prevent us from ever going back. I.e., I grew up in Montana, and my dad and I would often go and buy a mule deer tag for $8, a white-tailed deer tag for $8, and an elk tag for $16. And both of us would fill those in about a week. Those days are probably gone. But just because they're gone doesn't prevent us from moving forward. And I put that Arizona may be the clarion call for this pattern that exists. In the last decade, we have gone from a very rural state to an urban state. In fact, just a couple years ago, we made the switch from being a majority rural state to a majority urban state. And the patterns that we've seen in the changes in the way people interact with wildlife, as well as the changes that we've seen in our demography, illustrate the changes that may be coming for other states in the future. And we've made plenty of mistakes. We've had some successes, and if other states can learn from either one of those, that is a great thing. Making 2 mistakes in a row is generally not smiled upon. And finally, the public passion for wildlife is not fading. How they connect is changing, and it's changing significantly. Now, to illustrate how folks are changing in the way they perceive wildlife, I'm going to be using 2 concepts of wildlife value orientations. One is a utilitarian or domination wildlife orientation, where it comes from an ideology of human mastery over nature, where wildlife exists for human use and for human benefit, and the needs of human trump those of wildlife. Now compare that to the mutualism wildlife value orientation, where it comes from more of an ideology of egalitarianism, where animals are seen capable of an emotional bonding and potential companions, where animals have rights similar to those of humans. Now, in each survey that I've done here in Arizona for the past 3 years, we have asked questions to quantify where people fall on the domination scale and the mutualism scale. And what that allows us to do, now we have a sample size of approximately 8,000 here. And that's a pretty big sample size, and what that allows us to do is create confidence intervals at each age group. And that large sample size allows us to see patterns. For example, those that were born between 1940 and 1950, they were relatively low on the utilitarian or domination scale and somewhat higher on the mutualism scale. Now, about 1950, that trend kind of reversed and stayed somewhat reversed all the way up until folks who were born in about 1980. And we do see some noise, but the most I guess marked change that we see in this graph is this, where those who are born 1980 and after, that millennial generation, is growing in mutualism, and they're going up on this index, and they continue to climb. Now, I've shown you this data on birth year, but I'd like to show you a mirror image of this flipped on the x-axis, so we can begin talking about people's age. We see that same increase there as people get younger. We see the same sort of reversal of trend here for those folks who are born between 1940s and 1955 or so. And the reason why I want to show it to you flipped is so that we can begin talking about this intelligently when we contrast it against the sale of our hunting licenses. These each are our hunting licenses that we sold on a per age basis. Each color here represents a different hunting license that we sell here. Now, we have our peak right here at about 50, which coincides with the growing trend of the domination scale right here. We also have a mid-peak right here, which correlates with this little jump right here. But then we start to see a pretty large drop-off in our hunting license sales. And what that coincides with is this growth of mutualism in the younger generations. Now, we have a youth hunting license, so this drop is somewhat artificial, but when you add those in, what it looks like is more or less kind of a tapering off until you meet these reds that are youth hunting. But on the flip side, you also have a mid peak here that coincides with a moderate peak here in the domination scales, and here we have this dead cat bounce that occurs when people are retiring. Presumably, what's happening there is the actual process of retirement is eating up a lot of their time, and then once people are retired, they're able to continue on with their activities. Okay, so our hunting licenses. Right now you're seeing it as a histogram, and what I want to do is I want to flip this vertically. And I'd like to show it to you in color-coded format, where the cooler colors represent the higher peaks. For example, this higher peak right here coincides with this green. This moderate peak coincides with this green, and then the dip, we drop down to orange and then finally red. And what these are representative of, they are the percentage of people in that age group that went hunting in the year 2011. And the reason why I'd like to show you that in this format is we can begin looking at license sales trends across time. And instead of looking at 20 or 30 histograms all trying to divine what it is they're trying to say, we can begin looking at some patterns within the data. Now, we can see that here we have this peak, and that peak pretty consistently moves back through time. Now, we say that our customer is that 50-year-old white male, and that's true. It's absolutely true in today's 2011. However, as you go back through time, 2 decades ago, our typical constituent was in their early 30s. And so what has happened is that group in their early 30s kind of came on board, and they're moving through our population, and they're moving through in kind of the pig and the python approach, where they're kind of staying all together as they move through time. And today we are viewing those folks as the middle-aged male that exists there. Now, I kind of broke this up according to generations. We can see that the late Gen Xers the late baby boomers and early Gen Xers are that cohort that is going through time. The millennial generation is up here. Now this baby boomer silent generation forms a little bit of a border there where there's lower participation within that silent generation. You'll also notice too that there is a pretty solid flat line here at about 70 or 72, and that's where the attrition rate is pretty significant. And as I look at that, that might be attributable to physical restraints. People aren't able to get up and move. Now, thus far, I've spoken to you all about hunting licenses. When we begin talking about resident fishing licenses, we also see the same pattern where we have this cohort of people, and it's coming through through time here, where now we have the similar pattern that we see in hunting, although it's not as pronounced within the fishing population. When you look at the resident combo license, it is far more pronounced. And this we have, our late 30s folks 2 decades ago, and they're going through time, and that blue smudge that exists there actually matches the slope of the time as we go through. One important point that I'd like to point out too is here we have a lot of dark colors all mixed in together. And what this suggests to me is this data is highly kurtotic about 2 decades ago. But as you come out, it starts to blend out. Those colors aren't as pronounced. And this is more of a platycurtic distribution where there isn't that high concentration. So this is, you know, our main, I guess, bread and butter, for lack of a better word, and there's attrition within that group. Now, with a combination license, you also notice that there's a pretty hard break at about 70 to 72 where that has a physical limitation. Now, when I look at this graph, I see that there's a very strong trend down here and is likely to continue out into the future. And as that trend, as that blue smudge continues out here through time, it eventually is going to meet at the intersection of this line over here that's flat, where there's a physical attrition rate. And where those two intersect is about 2028 or 2030. And at that point, we are going to see significant shrinking political support as our traditional constituencies no longer participate in those activities. We're also going to see reduced revenue as those licenses aren't being purchased anymore. And we'll see a shrinking social relevance as we continue on. Now, I ask a question at the very front part of this presentation of what the major difference is between a ferret and a coyote. And Dana pointed out that the difference is $50 in Utah. But in my mind, in my way of thinking, the major difference between a black-footed ferret and a coyote is their biological plasticity. A coyote will survive just about anywhere because they're such generalists. They have sources of food or sources of income where they can make a living just about anywhere. Whereas a ferret is highly specialized onto one way of living, and as that way of living disappears, so have they. And basically, that's OWP's mission. OWP exists to help agencies keep the benefits of being a ferret and gain the flexibility of becoming a coyote. And with that, I'd like to open it up and talk about our fishing licenses, our hunting licenses, our combination licenses, and these three are all our resident licenses, whereas this is our fishing, hunting, and combo licenses, but these are our non-residents. Oops, sorry about that. These are our non-residents, and those patterns exist a little bit, but they get a little fuzzy within the data. So thus far, we've talked about the age of our constituencies, the age as people purchase our hunting and fishing licenses, and how they change across time. And the next steps to me is pretty simple. There's probably more than two variables here, and I would propose one potential third variable is actual states. I would suspect that states like Arizona and Wyoming, Montana, all have patterns that probably exist similar to this. If not, this slope might be a little bit more shallow. But there might be other states such as California, maybe Virginia, Oregon, Washington, where these slopes might be more steep. And I guess the next steps in my mind is form a collaboration and begin looking into the patterns that exist and view anomalies. Right now, I'd like to draw your attention to this right here. This year is 2011 or I'm sorry, 2007 for us, and you'll see that everything is shifted up just a little bit. Now, right now in our data set, that's an anomaly, and we know why it's an anomaly. That's the one year that we were able to go online, and we did so for about 6 months, and all the rest are paper applications. But as we gain more information from other states, those anomalies become patterns. We can begin looking at what happened when states switched from a paper license to an electronic application. We can begin seeing different anomalies and attributing data to them and begin looking at these anomalies and turning them into information and ultimately knowledge. And then the next step is to track individuals across time and see, yeah, we see this pattern within the population, but do we also see this pattern within individuals as they move across time? So as I was presenting this and bouncing ideas off of my wife, because she always gives me good feedback and good criticism, she asked me, why are you doing this? And it's a very good question. And the only way that I could answer her after thinking about it is, I guess I have a vision, and that vision involves me sitting on a lawn chair around a campfire with my 2 kids here, who are also teaching their kids how to skin the deer that they just harvested. And you know, that concept, that vision brings a smile to my face to be able to pass on hunting and angling onto the next generation and promote this conservation ethic. And in order to achieve that vision that is so important to me, we've got to conserve wildlife. And in order to conserve wildlife, we've got to understand our constituents, because they're the ones who own that wildlife. And one step that we can take to understand those constituents, and one step that we can take today, is by beginning to look at patterns within our data. And I guess my question to you all, and I'd like to open it up for discussion and idea sharing, is the first question: does anybody share that vision with me? Whether substitute your own vision into that, but does anybody share like-minded visions? Utah, Idaho, Colorado, and Wyoming have all joined me in concept, and we'd like to put together a demonstration project that we can present at WAFWA. And if we can present this as a demo project and show utility at WAFWA, we might be able to turn this into a bigger project. And like I said, Utah, Idaho, Colorado, and Wyoming have agreed to join into that demo project. My question to you all is there anybody else who might be interested in joining this demo project and participate in this dialogue?
This is Maria from Alaska. When you say join in, what would that mean?
That's a good question. In my mind, join in would be the states that have agreed to join in have agreed to clean some of their licensed data sales and do this analysis and aggregate it with the analysis that we've already done. Now, if your state does not have the personnel to do that, OWP would be willing to jump in and help with that analysis.
Sure, we'd be interested, but we don't have any to do it. If you could help.
Okay.
Lauren, this is Bill, also from Alaska, but over in our fisheries division, sport fish division, and we've had over the years some capacity to look at trends within our fishing license patterns, not to the recent extent that you have there in Arizona. And I guess the some of the issues that have come to mind are relate to, you know, whether the agency that, you know, kind of doing this analysis ready to accept the answer that, to my mind, is somewhat inevitable, and that there's going to be a shift, and it's going to be vary by state and region, you know, culturally, into kind of who are the primary constituents for your agency. And to me, that's the big issue that's playing out in various forms within the traditional, you know, management system, which is there's a lot of political resistance to that. There's a lot of effort being poured into kind of how do we stem the tide of change when that may not be realistic in some areas, some states. And
okay. No, that's a good point, and I don't think I would ever advocate. I think you worded it as stemming change. I'm not advocating that we prevent that change. What I am advocating is that we understand it and that we take advantage of it. Because inevitably things are going to change, but what I'm not willing to give up is that vision of wildlife conservation that I've got. I'm not willing to give up on that, and if it means changing and rolling with the punches and having agencies that look a little differently than they did as much as, you know, back in the 70s and 80s, that's okay. I'm willing to change so long as that vision that I have still exists in some way.
This is Glenn Pauly from Wyoming, and I think it's real important when we talk within our agencies about this. I think that's a fear within the agencies, and I think that's a fear within a lot of our traditional constituents. But I think it's really important to market this or to talk about this as an expansion of incorporating new people in what we do, and not necessarily a shift away as far as making the tent larger.
Glenn, I couldn't agree with you more. I love the idea of expansion, because in 2 decades, if we're ignoring hunters and anglers, that's just as bad as not integrating the more non-consumptive folks that we may have done in the past. So yeah, I'm definitely not advocating a swing. What I am advocating is building a bigger tent and making room for more people who love wildlife but just happen to do it in different ways. That's a good point, Glenn. I like that.
yeah, this is Bill again. I think Glenn hit the nail on the head. It's more about the message than, in some respects, it is about how you present these analyses. And you know, it's not a new message, I guess. It's been one that's been worked on quite a bit. And I guess what I see is that there are it continues to need a lot of work and support to craft it carefully, because I think there are some states, and I guess in my view, is kind of the shift has occurred in some states, more of them east of the Mississippi than west, but it's not. It's just happening at different rates across the country, and I would expect that to be the case. But it's not a new message. It's something that we've been working on a long time, and what I like, Lauren, is the fact that we're putting good analyses behind that message.
That's what Human Dimensions does. That's the purpose of our field, is to put good science behind some of these messages.
Hey, Lauren, this is Michelle.
Yes.
I have a question on the surveys that you do every year. Do you ask about latent demand?
Yes.
Can you speak to that at all? Is it great? Is it shrinking? Is it?
Yeah. we can speak to that. I can speak to it only in Arizona because that's the only data that I have right now. But there is latent demand for these activities. In fact, in our next webinar, we're going to be discussing the latent demand that exists within wildlife viewing, photography, hunting, angling, hiking, camping, all sorts of stuff.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
Hey, Lauren, it's Dave.
Yes.
I want to make a comment that I've made to you before when you showed this data to some of us a while ago, but that I'd also just like to raise with everybody else. I mean, I think in some ways, and it's to that idea of building a bigger tent. In some ways, I see the way you've collected and displayed this information as a really optimistic opportunity. And what I mean by that is we often, for many years now, as we have talked about the demographic changes in our hunting and fishing constituencies, we've sort of treated it like it's an inevitable tide. There's nothing we can do about it. Our customers are getting old and eventually dying, and we're doomed. But what I see here is that that's not the case. What it really is that a couple of decades ago, we did a very good job of reaching a younger demographic, and then we just sort of stopped talking to anybody else and kept talking to that same demographic for the last 20 years. But it says to me that there is a lot of opportunity. You know, there are a lot of people in their 20s and 30s who might hunt and fish that we aren't talking to, but they're out there. Mm-hmm. And I think it's part of kind of building that bigger tent, and maybe this also gets at the latent demand issue that you want to talk about next time. But I mean, I think this really says we have a much more hopeful situation than I think we've often had in the past, because we're not sort of faced with this inevitable decline and eventual death of our constituents and license buyers. You know, we really do have a rich opportunity here. We just aren't taking advantage of it yet.
Yeah, yeah. I'm quite I'm quite excited about our future. We are going to have to face some tough times, but broadening our tent, it's going to be tough. But I don't know about you guys, but I feel that down here in Arizona, if there's anybody up to the task, it's the folks within our agency.
Lauren, this is Bill again. Question about the kind of the resident versus non-resident tensions or dynamics that exist, and we know from past research that states vary considerably kind of with regard to that. For example, here in Alaska on the fishery, sport fishing side of things, it's kind of this little known secret among some that, you know, 75+% of the revenue that supports sport fisheries management in the state of Alaska is actually funded by the non-residents who come here and fish, as opposed to the much smaller proportion based on population size of the resident. And I wonder if how you've dealt with that within your agency, this issue of who do we serve, who are the constituents, how big is the tent, and do non-residents have a role in kind of the future direction. I know this is an issue that we've raised in our recent newsletter, Peter Fritzel did, and I wonder how Arizona is approaching that.
You know, that's a good question, and I'm not a sage on the stage, so I'm gonna actually open it up to other people of how to approach that. I don't have all the answers. So if anybody else would like to address how their state's handling it, we'd love to hear from you.
Well, this is Gary from Indiana. I'm really not willing to say that I know how to handle it, but I think that whole revenue issue needs to be wound into this somehow, because those are very real issues. And within that issue is preferences, who wants to do what, and then there's also competition for space. So somehow or another that dimension of who's paying for what and who gets what they think they want to pay for needs to be part of this. I think it's a big driver sometimes.
Okay. You know, I see that Montana's not represented here, but having lived in Montana for a while, they're doing a Come Home to Hunt program where people who used to be residents can go back and get some kind of benefit. And I got to tell you, it's worked on me. So maybe that's something to be thinking about as well.
Yeah, this is Bill. I think there's kind of there's probably several facets to this, and one is it's kind of on the marketing side of things in terms of reaching out to customers or constituents, who maybe former constituents who don't live in state anymore, and then the reverse is, as Gary pointed out, the competition and the inevitable kind of tensions that might exist between who does the agency serve first, who do they serve second. If it's put in those kind of terms, but I think that's the tension that some states are going to have to wrestle with to some extent. Is there is going to be some tension between kind of the preferences and residents and non-residents for certain types of opportunities, and being how do you balance those things, and how transparent and explicit are you as an agency in your kind of management philosophy related to that?
This is David Thorne in Missouri. We have that same tension, and with deer hunters, for example, we know that there are about 15,000 deer hunters in Missouri, but what they spend, they represent about 3 to 5 times that many folks. So if you put them on an equivalent basis, they're like a quarter of our deer hunting population in what they might spend, but we don't maximize revenue or income. We have that tension between our primary responsibility on who we serve, so our out-of-state prices tend to be much higher, quite a bit higher, and because we focus on those residents and the citizens of Missouri.
I certainly do want to say that, this is Gary from Indiana again, I certainly do want to say that I enjoyed the graphs and the way the material was presented. I've never seen that sort of a presentation, and that's very nice. So kudos to whoever developed that.
Okay. Are there any other states who might have an interest in joining the demonstration project?
Lauren, this is Alicia in Nebraska. I think there's some interest here in Nebraska. We certainly have quite a bit of data. I don't know if we can crunch it exactly the same way. But we have not done the surveying every year, but I don't think that's necessarily what you were looking for. You were just looking for license information, correct?
Correct. What you're looking at right now is solely license information.
We've actually seen, I believe an increase in our non-resident hunters more than our resident. We've seen the drop in our resident hunters and an increase in our non-resident hunters in Nebraska. I'd be curious to see how things look in South Dakota, which has been traditionally a more utilitarian state, which I'm guessing maybe is why you're looking at Montana and Wyoming.
I'm not looking at specific states, but I would like to get a representative sample of all kinds of different states. As Bill up in Alaska pointed out, that there's a lot of different cultures around different state agencies, and the more broadly those are represented, I think the more compelling our argument to WAFWA will be.
I think when we did the wildlife values big project, Nebraska was still more utilitarian than mutualist. So.
Okay. We'd love to have you on board.
We could talk some more.
Okay. That sounds good. Well, are there any other comments that folks have?
Hey, Lauren, this is Bruce Ackerman in Idaho. We'll be in on it. I'll summarize this license data.
Excellent.
I guess as far as stemming the tide, there's no stemming the tide. That's like pushing back the tsunami. These young people are already born, and us old guys are on the way out.
Laura, could you? This is Bill again. Could you? Are you thinking about a proposal that would go before the WAFA this summer, and you know, is something that, you know, once you have the more information fleshed out, or if it's already fleshed out, could you send that around to the folks on the call so we can wrap our heads around it and get some folks? Like in my case, I'd have to. Here in Alaska, we have such distinct divisions. We'd have to approach it from both pathways.
Sure, sure. I don't necessarily want to get it in front of WAFWA. What I'd like to do is get as much information into decision makers' hands as possible. I think we all know that things are changing. I think we all intuitively understand that our demographic are changing and the way people are interacting with wildlife is changing. But when folks see this kind of data, particularly the decision makers here in Arizona see this data, it creates a sense of urgency. You know, the fact that we have 2 decades to build a bigger tent, you know, state agencies move a little slow sometimes, and having 2 decades of prep time is probably a good idea.
That's a very good point. Well, I just say just tell us what what type of data you need and what are the parameters around it in terms of historical information, and you know, and we can, in my case, I'll work on trying to push that request, get the data.
Okay, that'd be great. Well,
this is Maria from Alaska. Just wanted to say that creating the sense of urgency, I think, is really important, and people respond differently to different kinds of things. I think this is one useful way to talk about it. Anything we can do to create that urgency is good.
Okay. Well, what I'll do then is kind of send out maybe a memo that you can take around to your leadership or your IT folks of what kind of information is needed to create a visual like this, and then your states can decide if you'd like to participate or not.
Yeah, I think it'll be real helpful, Lauren, to kind of have the example that you've presented as here's where this analysis is going, and in order to make that case, and it's something that I've been trying to get off the ground here in our agency, and haven't been successful. I think that's probably the case with a number of states, just in terms of capacity, let alone maybe the priority, you know, where it sits in the priority list. But I think if with you providing that example, there being some kind of momentum and more states getting on board, I think it would help a lot of states, I think, address we don't have the capacity right now in-house, but if we can get this going and we can generate some interest, then the capacity may develop in the future for these types of analyses at the agency level.
Okay. Yeah, I wouldn't worry about personnel. If personnel is the issue, OWP would be happy to provide that analysis for you.
Lauren, this is Alicia again. We had some other folks here at Game and Parks that weren't able to come to this. I know you said you're recording it. Are you going to be able to do some kind of hard copy or something like that folks can see the presentation?
If folks would like it, I would be happy to share it.
I know we would here.
Okay.
Laura, this is Glenn in Wyoming. I would like one too. I don't want to saddle you with a lot of work, but it was a great presentation. It'd be nice to distribute that to more people.
Okay. I'll figure out a way to get it to you either electronically or in a hard format.
That'd be great.
This is Maria from Alaska. I'd like a copy too.
Okay. Okay, well, just as a conclusionary note then, it looks like we're quickly approaching our deadline here. We as the Organization of Wildlife Planners would like to invite you to the next discussion where we're talking about that group of wildlife viewers who are not that monolithic group that we oftentimes refer to them as. And also it taps into the latent demand of those activities. And I wanted to invite you to that of so many different kinds of people and other things that Gwen Stefani actually got right. We're shifting from we're shifting gears a little bit from Bob Dylan to No Doubt right now. So we'd love to have you on April 25th. I'll send that out as an invite if you'd like to join us. We'd love to have you. If you're not able to join us, maybe we can get you next time.
Great, thanks, Lauren.
Okay.
Thank you, Lauren.
Are there any questions? Any other questions before we break?
Lauren, just one. Mountain Standard Time. What time is it there now?
It's 10 to 11 right now.
10 to 11. Okay. Thanks.
Yep, no problem.
What's noon our time? Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm not hearing any additional questions, so I'm going to go ahead and break this off and let you guys get back to your next appointment.
Thanks.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thanks. Very nice to done.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thanks for coming. Tara, are you still on?